No one inside the wedding hall expected the night to become a scandal. They had all gathered to witness what many people were calling the most powerful marriage of the year. Rows of powerful guests filled the room, whispering to each other as they waited for the ceremony to begin. At the center of it all stood the groom, Han Sam, a man who had built one of the fastest-growing tech companies in South Korea. Tonight, he was marrying the daughter of one of the country's most powerful families. Everything about the wedding screamed success. But the guests were not whispering about the bride. They were whispering about someone else. A woman standing quietly near the back of the hall. She wore a deep burgundy dress. No diamonds. No designer entourage. Just calm silence. She was Han Sam's ex-wife. And everyone in that room knew exactly why she had been invited. Not to celebrate. Not to reconnect. But to be humiliated. A group of women nearby chuckled under their breath. 5 years of marriage, one of them muttered. And she couldn't even give him a child. Another guest smirked. No heir, no value. The bride herself glanced toward the woman with a faint, satisfied smile. After all, tonight was proof that Han Sam had replaced her with someone better. Someone worthy of his empire. At least, that was what everyone believed. But what none of them knew was that outside the wedding hall, a black Rolls-Royce had just pulled up to the entrance. And inside that car were 3 children who looked exactly like Han Sam. 3 children who had come to ask one simple question. A question that would soon silence the entire wedding.
Daddy, why did you abandon us?
Daddy, why did you abandon us? This is the story of an African woman who stayed with a Korean man when he had nothing, through the thick and tough, and how he will pay through his nose for discarding her and her infants like trash after becoming successful. Welcome to Afro-Korean Story Diaries. If you're new here, like this video and subscribe, so you don't miss the intense, dramatic stories we release every day. Turn on notifications, because this story is only just beginning. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now let's go back to where it all started. Nobody in that wedding hall expected what was about to walk through those doors. The chandeliers were blinding. The flowers were imported from Amsterdam. The guest list read like a page from Buson's most powerful business directory. And at the center of it all stood Sam Han, CEO, billionaire, the man every newspaper in South Korea had spent the last 3 years calling the most powerful self-made mind in Korean tech. He looked perfect. Perfectly pressed white suit, perfectly composed expression, perfectly rehearsed smile for every guest that passed by to congratulate him. But if you looked closely, and very few people did, his jaw was slightly too tight. His fingers kept folding and unfolding at his side, and every few minutes his eyes moved toward the entrance of the hall with something that wasn't quite anticipation. It was something closer to guilt. Because Sam Han had done something today that nobody could fully explain. He had personally mailed an invitation to his ex-wife. Not just any invitation. A formal, gold-embossed, hand-delivered card addressed specifically to Deborah Osai, the woman he had divorced 5 years ago, the woman his family had spent years calling every ugly name they could manufacture, the woman who had walked out of his life with nothing but a single suitcase and a silence so complete it had haunted him on nights he refused to admit he was awake. He told himself it was closure. He told himself it was proof to her, to everyone, that he had moved on completely, that he had won, that the chapter she represented was firmly, permanently, publicly closed. His new bride certainly believed that. Soo-yeon Lim stood beside him in a gown that had taken 8 months and 4 designers to construct. She was beautiful in the cold, deliberate way that powerful women sometimes are, like every feature had been carefully arranged rather than simply given. She was also the daughter of Chairman Lim, whose conglomerate controlled nearly a third of Korean shipping. The marriage wasn't just romantic. It was a merger. Everyone in the room understood that. And Soo-yeon had been the one to suggest inviting Deborah. "Let her come," she had said 2 weeks earlier, sitting across from Sam at a dinner neither of them was really eating. "Let her sit in that hall and watch everything she lost. That's not cruelty, Sam. That's honesty." He had hesitated, but only for a moment. And so the invitation was sent. Now the guests were whispering in clusters, the way wedding guests do when something delicious is about to unfold. Word had spread the way it always does in rooms full of people who have too much money and too much time. "Did you hear? He invited the African wife. 5 years of marriage, and she couldn't give him a single child." Imagine being replaced by Soo-yeon Lim of all people. The humiliation. "She probably won't even come. If she has any self-respect left, she won't." Soo-yeon heard every word. She let the faintest smile settle at the corner of her lips and said nothing. She had engineered this moment too carefully to ruin it with visible pleasure. Then a staff member, young, slightly breathless, clearly unsure how to handle what he just witnessed, pushed through the side door and made his way across the hall with the specific urgency of someone carrying information they didn't know what to do with. He leaned close to Sam and whispered, "Sir, there's a Rolls-Royce outside." Sam frowned. "Which guest?" The young man swallowed. It's her, sir, the ex-wife." But he paused, and something in his expression made Sam go very still. "She didn't come alone." The room didn't know that yet. But something shifted in the air. The way it does right before a storm announces itself, not with thunder, but with a silence so sudden that every conversation stops mid-sentence and every head turns toward the door at the same moment, following some collective instinct that nobody can explain afterward. The entrance opened, and Deborah Osei walked in. She wasn't what anyone had expected. The woman they had built in their imaginations, the defeated ex-wife arriving out of stubbornness or desperation or some misguided hope, did not exist. The woman who walked through those doors wore a deep burgundy dress that moved with her like it had been sewn specifically for this moment. Her head was high, her eyes were steady, and everything about her posture said something that didn't require a single word to communicate. She had not come to be humiliated. But none of that was what stopped the room. What stopped the room came through the door behind her. 3 children. Identical in the most impossible, undeniable way. 2 boys and a girl, all somewhere around 4 years old, all dressed formally, all holding each other's hands with the practiced ease of siblings who had learned early to be each other's anchor. And every person in that hall who had ever spent more than 5 minutes in Sam Hand's presence felt something cold move through them. Because those children had his eyes. The exact shape of them, the exact depth, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corner that Sam's mother had always called the Hand family mark. Triplets. The whispers died completely. And Sam Hand, for the first time in 5 years, forgot how to stand properly. He stared at the children the way a man stares at something his mind refuses to process. His lips parted slightly. Soo-yeon noticed, and the smile at the corner of her mouth, the one she had been carrying all morning like a small, private trophy, slowly, quietly disappeared. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And one thought was pulsing through every single mind in that enormous, expensive, flower-filled hall. Whose children are those? To understand what happened in that room, you have to go back. Not just a year, not just to the divorce. You have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a small apartment in Mapo district, Busan, where a man who would one day own 3 buildings in the Cheongdam skyline was eating instant noodles for the 4th night in a row, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense. And beside him, cross-legged on a second-hand sofa, was Deborah. She had found him through a mutual friend at a networking event neither of them had particularly wanted to attend. He was 26, burning with ambition and completely broke. She was 24, finishing her MBA on a partial scholarship, working 2 jobs to cover the gap. They had argued for 40 minutes at that first meeting about whether passion or strategy was more important in building a business. Neither of them won the argument. Both of them went home thinking about the other. That was how it started. Not with grand gestures, not with money or status or the kind of romance that gets written about. It started with 2 people who recognized something in each other that the rest of the world hadn't yet bothered to notice. Sam was brilliant. Everyone who spent more than an hour with him understood that. But brilliance without resources is just frustration dressed in potential, and in those early years, Sam had more frustration than he could contain. His tech startup, a logistics optimization platform he had been building for 3 years, kept hitting the same wall. Investors would take meetings, nod along politely, and then send rejection emails that all sounded like variations of the same template. Too early. Too risky. Come back when you have traction. He would come home on those nights with the particular silence of a man who doesn't trust himself to speak yet. And Deborah would not ask him to talk. She would simply make tea, sit across from him at their small kitchen table and wait, not with pity, not with performance, just with the kind of steady presence that tells another person, without a single word, that they are not alone in whatever they are carrying. Sam sat in front of his laptop, staring at another rejection email. Another investor had refused to fund his company. He rubbed his temples in frustration. "I don't understand," he muttered. "This idea should work." Across the room, a woman walked over and gently placed a bowl of ramen in front of him. "Then it will," she said softly. Sam looked up. It was her, the woman who now stood silently at the back of his wedding hall. Back then, she wasn't his ex-wife. She was the woman who refused to give up on him when the rest of the world already had. "You should eat first," she told him with a smile. He sighed. "You worked all day. You shouldn't have to take care of me too." She laughed quietly. "I'm not taking care of you," she said. "I'm investing in you." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Investing?" She nodded confidently. "One day, when your company becomes successful, I'll remind you that I was your first investor." For the first time that night, Sam smiled. Because when everyone else saw a failing startup, she saw a future. And for a while, that belief was enough to keep his dream alive. She was the only person in his life who treated his failures as information rather than evidence. Where his family saw embarrassment and his former classmates saw a cautionary tale, Deborah saw data. She would pull his rejected pitch decks across the table, ask sharp questions, make notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad she kept specifically for his business ideas, and by midnight they would have rebuilt the thing from the inside out. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his first real investor, not with money, because neither of them had any, but with something more finite and more valuable: time, energy, belief at the specific moments when his own had run out. When the electricity was cut off for 3 days in the winter of their second year together, she didn't complain. She bought candles, charged her laptop at the library, and kept working. When his co-founder walked out and took 2 key engineers with him, she sat with him until 3 in the morning, helping him draft a message to the remaining team that was honest without being desperate. When the bank declined his small business loan for the second time, she quietly took an extra shift at the hotel where she worked part-time and didn't mention it until he found the deposit receipt 3 weeks later. He had stood in the kitchen holding that receipt, staring at it for a long time. "You didn't tell me," he said. She looked up from her laptop. "You would have argued with me about it." "Deborah." "Sam," her voice was quiet but firm, We're building something. That's what you do when you're building something. You fill the gaps. He married her 8 months later in a small ceremony with 12 guests, and a cake her mother had shipped from Accra in a box that arrived slightly lopsided but tasted extraordinary. There was no extravagance. There was no family approval. There was just the two of them, standing in front of a civil registrar in downtown Busan, making promises in a language that wasn't either of their first languages, meaning every word. His family did not attend. They had been informed, not invited, because Sam already knew what their response would be, and on the day he was marrying Deborah, he did not want that particular poison in the room. But poison, as it turns out, is remarkably patient. It waited. The company turned its first real profit 14 months after the wedding. A mid-sized shipping company in Busan signed a contract that changed everything overnight. Then a second client. Then a third. Then a feature in a Korean business magazine with a photograph of Sam looking purposeful against a glass building, under a headline that read, "The Quiet Disruptor: How One Founder is Rewiring Korean Logistics." But success has a strange way of attracting people who were never there during the struggle. And the moment Sam Hand's company finally started growing, the people who had once ignored him suddenly returned, including the one group of people who would eventually destroy his marriage. His family. His phone rang 3 hours after the magazine hit stands. His mother's voice on the other end was warm in a way he hadn't heard since childhood. "Sam, your father and I were thinking we should all have dinner." He should have recognized it then, the timing, the warmth, the invitation that arrived precisely when the money did. He should have held that pattern up to the light and seen it clearly for what it was. But he was happy, and happy people are terrible at reading warning signs. The dinner was at his parents' home in Seongbuk-dong, a traditional Hanok house that his father had inherited, and his mother had spent 30 years filling with objects chosen specifically to communicate wealth to anyone who entered. Sam arrived with Deborah beside him, her hand in his, both of them dressed carefully for the occasion. His mother opened the door, looked at Sam's face with genuine warmth, then moved her eyes to Deborah. The warmth didn't disappear exactly. It simply rerouted around Deborah, past her, as though she were a piece of furniture that had been positioned inconveniently in the hallway. "Come in," his mother said to him. At dinner, the conversation moved in careful orbits. Business, family news, the neighborhood. His father asked reasonable questions about the company and nodded at the answers with the satisfied expression of a man recalibrating his opinion of his son upward. His mother served food and smiled and said almost nothing directed at Deborah for the first 40 minutes. When she finally spoke to her, it was with a smile so precisely calibrated that anyone watching from across the room would have thought it was kindness. "You must find Busan very different," his mother said, "from where you come from." Deborah set down her chopsticks gently. "I've lived here for 6 years. It feels like home now." A small sound, a smaller smile. "Still, it must be difficult adjusting to our customs, our standards." Sam looked up. "Iyama." "I'm only saying," his mother continued, her voice never changing pitch, "that marriage is not just two people. It is two families, two legacies, and there are certain things a family like ours must consider." Deborah held the woman's gaze steadily and said nothing. And Sam, the man who had built a company from nothing, who had stood in front of skeptical investors and refused to flinch, looked down at his plate. That was the second sign. And once again, he missed it completely. The drive home that night was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of two people who don't need to fill space, the pressurized quiet of something unspoken expanding between them. Finally, Deborah said, "She doesn't want me here." Sam exhaled. "She just needs time. She's old-fashioned. She'll come around." Deborah turned to look at him in the dark of the car. "Sam, She looked through me for an hour like I was a stain on the wall. That's not old-fashioned. That's a decision. She waited for Minyi to say something. To defend her. To remind his family that she had been there when no one else was. But instead, he simply sighed and said softly, "Please, let's not argue tonight." But something behind her eyes had already begun calculating, quietly, privately, what it would cost her to stay in a family that had already decided what she was worth. The answer, as the months ahead would prove, was everything. Why did his family hate her so much? Was it really just about culture? Or was there something more calculated, something darker, already being designed in the background? Tell me in the comments what you think and stay with this story. Do you think he should have defended her? And if you've not subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? Subscribe now, because this story is about to get much worse before it gets anywhere close to justice. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. That's the thing about certain kinds of cruelty, the sophisticated kind, the kind practiced by people with patience and resources. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, like water finding the smallest crack in a foundation, working into it slowly, silently, until the morning comes when the whole structure shifts and everyone pretends to be surprised. His mother began with the small things. A comment at Sunday lunch about how Korean daughters-in-law traditionally manage the household finances. A casual remark at a family gathering about how certain women prioritized careers over family responsibilities. An innocent-sounding question asked in front of relatives about whether Deborah had considered adjusting her diet to better align with Korean nutritional customs. Because, as his mother explained with a sympathetic tilt of her head, the body sometimes struggles when it's far from its natural environment. Every comment came wrapped in a smile. Every insult arrived dressed as concern. And every time Sam was present for one of these moments, Deborah would watch him from across the room, waiting, giving him the space to say something, giving him the opening she felt he owed her. He would clear his throat. He would change the subject. He would find somewhere else to look. She stopped waiting after the 8th time. Instead, she began doing what she had always done when a situation became intolerable. She worked. She threw herself deeper into her own career, a supply chain consulting role at an international firm that had been trying to poach her for 2 years. She traveled. She built. She created a life inside the marriage that didn't depend on his family's approval, because she had finally understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who had run out of patience for illusions, that his family's approval was never going to come. What she hadn't fully accepted yet was that his family wasn't just withholding approval. They were building a case. The conversations Sam was having with his mother, the ones that happened when Deborah wasn't in the room, were not the gentle nudges of concerned parents. They were strategy sessions. His mother had decided, with the kind of cold finality that wealthy Korean matriarchs sometimes mistake for wisdom, that Deborah needed to be removed from her son's life. Not because Deborah had done anything wrong, but because Deborah existed in a category his mother had already decided was incompatible with the Han family name. She was black, she was foreign, she was not wealthy, and in his mother's carefully constructed hierarchy of value, those 3 facts outweighed every sacrifice Deborah had made, every hour she had worked, every night she had held Sam together when he had nothing left. None of that counted. None of it had ever counted in his mother's accounting. And so when 2 years of marriage passed without a pregnancy, his mother saw the opening she had been waiting for. It started, as these things often do, with a conversation framed as love. "Sama," his mother said, one evening when he had come to visit alone. She poured his tea with both hands the way she always did when she wanted him to feel like a child being taken care of. "I need to speak to you about something difficult." He sat down. "Your father and I have been patient. We have said nothing, but you are 32 years old. You are the only son. The hand name, she paused, pressing her lips together as though the next words caused her genuine pain. The hand name needs to continue, and I am beginning to worry. We're not in a rush, Iyama. 2 years, Sam. 2 years and nothing. She looked at him with carefully constructed grief. Have you considered that perhaps the problem is not timing, that perhaps there is a medical issue that needs to be addressed? He told her he would talk to Deborah. And he did. The conversation was one of the most uncomfortable of their marriage, not because Deborah was resistant, but because she could see exactly where it had come from. She agreed to the tests, not for his mother's peace of mind, but because she wanted the truth for herself. What came back changed everything. The doctor, a specialist at a private fertility clinic that Sam's mother had personally recommended, a detail that nobody questioned at the time, delivered the news with professional solemnity. There were significant complications, structural abnormalities. The likelihood of natural conception was, in the doctor's carefully chosen words, extremely low. Deborah sat in that office and felt something inside her go quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the last light is switched off. She asked to see the full report. The doctor handed it over without hesitation. She read every line. She asked 2 technical questions. The doctor answered them smoothly. She thanked him and walked out. In the car home, she said nothing for a long time. Sam drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw tight, his eyes forward. "I'm sorry," he finally said. 3 words that could have meant anything. Could have meant, "I'm sorry this is your reality. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm sorry my family put us here." What they actually meant, she would only understand later, was, "I'm sorry, but I'm already thinking about what this means for me." The family's response was swift and completely without mercy. His mother stopped pretending. At the next family dinner, which Deborah attended because she still believed, against all available evidence, that leaving would feel like surrender, his mother waited until the table was full and the food was being served, and then she said it. Clearly, loudly, without the smile she usually used as camouflage. "A woman who cannot carry the family line has no place at this table." The room went silent. An aunt looked at her soup bowl. An uncle reached for his chopsticks. 2 cousins exchanged a glance and immediately looked away. And Sam, her husband, the man she had kept alive through the worst years of his life, picked up his glass of water and took a slow sip. He said nothing. Deborah stood up. She folded her napkin. She placed it beside her plate with the precise, deliberate movements of a woman choosing not to become what the room was trying to make her. "Excuse me," she said quietly. She walked out of the dining room, through the entrance hall, and out of the front door into the cold night air. She stood on the street for a long time. She was not crying. She was thinking. And what she was thinking was this. There was a woman in that room who hated her with a precision that felt less like prejudice and more like purpose. There was a husband at that table who had just proved, beyond any remaining doubt, that when she needed him most he would always choose silence. And there was a doctor's report sitting in her bag that she was no longer entirely sure she believed. Because something about that clinic had felt wrong from the beginning. The way the doctor had answered her questions, fluently, yes, but slightly too fluently. The way the report was formatted differently from the 2 previous fertility assessments she had quietly obtained on her own from a separate clinic 3 months earlier. The way Sam's mother had recommended that specific doctor so quickly, so specifically, as though the recommendation had been prepared in advance. She pulled out her phone. She found the number of a doctor she trusted, a friend from her MBA program who had gone into reproductive medicine, now practicing in Singapore. She typed a message. "I need a second opinion. Urgently, can we talk this week?" She didn't know it yet, but that message, sent from a cold street outside a house that had never wanted her, was the first step toward everything that was coming. Was she really infertile? Or had someone decided, long before that doctor ever entered the room, exactly what that report was going to say? Keep watching, because what she was about to discover didn't just change her story. It destroyed theirs. The response from her friend in Singapore came back within 48 hours. Dr. Yemi Ademi had been one of the sharpest minds in their MBA cohort, the kind of person who finished exams early and spent the remaining time checking other people's work. She had pivoted to medicine after graduation, driven by something personal she rarely discussed, and she had spent the last 6 years building a quiet but respected reproductive medicine practice in Singapore. When Deborah's message arrived, Yemi didn't reply with pleasantries. She replied with a question. Who ran the tests? And did you get a copy of the full lab work, not just the summary report? Deborah sent everything she had. Yemi was silent for 18 hours. Then her call came through at 6 in the morning, Busan time. Deborah, her voice was careful in the way that careful voices always signal something serious. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to stay calm while I talk. Deborah sat up in bed. Beside her, Sam was still asleep. She slipped out of the room quietly, walked to the kitchen, and stood at the window with the phone pressed to her ear and the city beginning to lighten outside. Tell me, she said. These results have been manipulated. Yemi's words landed flat and certain without drama. The hormonal panel values are inconsistent with each other in ways that don't occur naturally. Someone altered the data after the fact. And the structural findings described in the report, I've reviewed your previous tests, the ones you sent me from the other clinic. Those findings don't exist. They were fabricated. The city outside kept brightening. A delivery truck moved through the street below. Someone somewhere was starting a completely ordinary morning. Yemi, Deborah's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you telling me? I'm telling you that based on your actual previous results, there is no medical reason you cannot conceive. You are healthy. Whoever wrote this report either made catastrophic errors, she paused, or they were paid to write something specific. Deborah pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. Paid. She turned the word over carefully, the way you handle something that might cut you if you grip it wrong. And as she turned it, other things began turning with it, the speed of his mother's recommendation, the strange fluency of the doctor's answers, the report formatted just differently enough from her previous ones. Small things, individual things, things she had filed away separately because no single one of them had been enough to constitute proof. Together they formed a picture so clear, it almost took her breath away. I need to know everything, Deborah said. I need to know who this doctor is and who he's connected to. I've already started looking, Yemi said. Give me 72 hours. Deborah hung up the phone and stood in her kitchen for a long time without moving. The morning light kept coming. She made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink. She thought about the woman who had looked through her like furniture at a dinner table all those months ago. She thought about the aunt who had stared at her soup bowl, the uncle who reached for his chopsticks, the cousins who looked away. She thought about her husband sleeping in the next room. And she made a decision, not in anger, not in the hot, uncontrolled way that decisions made in anger always arrive. She made it quietly, with the full weight of her intelligence behind it, with the particular resolve of a woman who had finally, completely, run out of the kind of hope that asks someone else to save her. She would find the truth. And she would keep it until the moment it was most needed. Yemi came back in 60 hours, not 72. What she had found was worse than Deborah had imagined. The doctor, a Dr. Sungmin Park, affiliated with the private clinic in Cheongdam that Sam's mother had recommended, had a financial relationship that didn't appear anywhere in his public professional records. A series of transfers, traced through 2 intermediary accounts, leading back to a company registered under a name Deborah didn't immediately recognize. Lim Tech Solutions. She stared at it. Lim. She opened her laptop and searched the name for 40 minutes before she found it, buried in a 3-year-old corporate filing, a subsidiary registered under the broader umbrella of Lim Group Holdings. Chairman Lim's conglomerate, the family whose daughter, Soo-yeon, had been appearing at the same industry events as Sam for the past 18 months. The woman who always seemed to be nearby when Deborah wasn't. The woman who touched Sam's arm when she talked to him with the practiced ease of someone rehearsing ownership. Deborah closed the laptop. She sat completely still for a moment. Then she said out loud to no one, "How long?" It wasn't really a question. It was the sound of something finally becoming completely legible. She did confront Sam. Not yet, because she understood, with the cold strategic clarity that had always been one of her strongest qualities, that confronting him now, before she had everything, before every piece was documented and verified and impossible to dismiss, would only give them time to adjust their story. She had not survived everything this family had done to her by being impulsive. She was methodical. She documented everything Yemi had found. She had the original lab work independently reviewed by 2 additional specialists, both of whom confirmed Yemi's assessment. She hired a discreet private investigator, a recommendation from a lawyer friend, who spent 3 weeks mapping the financial connection between Dr. Park and Lim Tech Solutions. And then something else surfaced. Something she hadn't been looking for but couldn't ignore once she found it. Her housekeeper, a quiet woman in her 60s named Mrs. Bay, who had worked for Sam since before the marriage, and who had always treated Deborah with a small, private kindness that Deborah had never quite understood, came to her one evening while Sam was at a work dinner. She stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a folded piece of paper with both hands. "I have kept this for 2 years," Mrs. Bay said. Her voice was low and slightly unsteady. "I told myself it was not my place, but you are leaving soon and I think you should know." Deborah took the paper. It was a receipt from a pharmacy, dated 18 months earlier, for a medication Deborah didn't recognize, a hormonal compound, prescribed under a name that was Deborah's, but for which Mrs. Bay had watched someone else add to Deborah's morning vitamin supplements on 2 separate occasions. "Who?" Deborah asked. Mrs. Bay looked at the floor. "Miss Soo-yeon came to the house 3 times when you were traveling. She said Mr. Han had invited her to drop off documents." She paused. "I did not know what was in the vitamins. Not until later when I looked it up. I'm sorry, I should have." "Mrs. Bay," Deborah's voice was steady, remarkably completely steady. "You came to me now, that's what matters." She photographed the receipt from 4 angles. She added it to the file. The medication, she had a pharmacist contact verify it within 24 hours, was a compound known to significantly disrupt hormonal balance and reduce fertility markers in blood work. Not permanently, but consistently enough, over a sustained period, to produce exactly the kind of results that Dr. Sung-min Park had been paid to confirm. She had been poisoned. Slowly, quietly, by a woman who wanted her husband and a doctor who wanted money, with the full knowledge, she was now almost certain, of the woman who had first handed her a cup of tea with both hands and called it love. 2 weeks after Mrs. Bay came to her kitchen doorway, Sam sat her down. His expression was the one she had learned to dread, carefully composed, slightly distant, the face he wore when he had made a decision, and was now preparing to deliver it as though it were a conclusion he had reached reluctantly, rather than a choice he had made deliberately. "Deborah," he folded his hands on the table, "I've thought about this for a long time, and I think we both know this isn't working." She looked at him. She waited. "My family needs an heir, I need a family, and the doctors have been clear that you," he stopped, started again. "I don't blame you, I want you to know that, but I need to think about the future of what I've built, And I can't. Another pause. I can't do that with someone who can't give me children. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Busen moved through its evening with complete indifference. You've already decided, she said. He didn't deny it. Sam, her voice was so calm it seemed to unsettle him. Look at me. He did. The woman who believed in you when you had nothing. The woman who paid the electricity bill and worked double shifts and sat with you at 3 in the morning rebuilding your pitch decks. That woman is sitting in front of you right now, and you're choosing this. He looked away. The divorce papers are already drafted, he said quietly. She stood up. She walked to the bedroom. She pulled out a single bag she had been quietly packing for a week because she had known this was coming, because she had always been better at reading the room than he gave her credit for. She carried the bag to the front door. She paused. She almost told him. Almost turned around and said the thing that would have changed the entire calculation. The thing that Dr. Yemi had confirmed for her just 9 days earlier, quietly and certainly, over a video call that Deborah had taken sitting in a parked car 3 blocks from the apartment. She was pregnant. 9 weeks. She pressed her hand flat against the door frame for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked out. She did not look back. And somewhere beneath the controlled, deliberate composure of a woman who had decided to survive this on her own terms, something small and fierce, and absolutely certain, was already forming its answer to the question nobody had thought to ask. What happens when the woman you underestimated decides you don't deserve to know what you lost, until she's ready to show you exactly what it looks like? 5 years later, a Rolls-Royce pulled up outside the most expensive wedding venue in Busan. And now you know why. The hall had gone from whispers to complete silence in the space of 10 seconds. That specific kind of silence, the kind that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your chest, had settled over 400 guests like a held breath that nobody knew how to release. Champagne glasses sat untouched. A string quartet in the corner had stopped mid-note. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim slightly, the way light sometimes does when a room's energy shifts too dramatically for the atmosphere to keep up. Deborah stood at the entrance with her 3 children beside her and let the silence do its work. She had not come here for chaos. She had come here for truth. But she understood, with the strategic intelligence that had carried her through 5 years of rebuilding her life from nothing, that sometimes truth needs an audience to become permanent. Spoken privately, it can be denied. Documented quietly, it can be buried. But witnessed by 400 people including journalists, business partners, family members, and the entirety of Busan's most connected social circle, it becomes something that cannot be walked back. That was why she had accepted the invitation. Not because she needed the closure. She had built her closure brick by brick over 4.5 years, in the Singapore office of the consulting firm that had made her a partner at 31. In the London apartment she had purchased outright without a single co-signer, in the 3 extraordinary human beings standing beside her who had inherited her resilience, and she noted with a private precision, their father's eyes. She had accepted the invitation because the woman who had poisoned her vitamins and bribed her doctor and dismantled her marriage was standing at the front of that hall in 8 months of custom couture, about to be rewarded for all of it. And Deborah had decided that today was not that woman's day. Sam had not moved. He stood 15 meters away from her across the hall with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of his own life was being quietly demolished in real time. His eyes moved from Deborah's face to the children, back to Deborah, back to the children, with the desperate, repetitive motion of someone hoping that a different look will produce a different result. It didn't, because children do not lie with their faces. And those 3 faces, the 2 boys with their father's jaw and their mother's composure, the girl with her mother's eyes and her father's particular way of holding her chin slightly elevated, were the most honest document in the room. It was the oldest boy who moved first. He had his mother's courage, that one. Had inherited it the way some children inherit a gift for music, not learned, just present, arriving fully formed. He stepped forward from beside his sister, crossed 6 meters of marble floor with the unhurried certainty of a child who had been told the truth his whole life, and therefore had no reason to be afraid of it, and stopped directly in front of Sam. He looked up at him for a long moment. Sam looked down. Neither of them spoke for what felt like a very long time. Then the boy said, in a voice that was quiet but carried to every corner of that silent hall, "Mom said you're our father." Sam's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The boy studied him with an expression that was not angry and not sad, and somehow, devastatingly, not even accusatory. It was simply curious. The honest, uncomplicated curiosity of a child trying to understand something that doesn't make sense to him yet. "Daddy," he said, "why did you abandon us?" 4 words. 4 words that landed in that hall like something physical, like a stone dropped into still water, the ripple moving outward instantly, touching every surface, reaching every person. A woman near the back covered her mouth with both hands. A man beside her looked at the floor. Someone near the front made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Soo-yeon, standing at the altar in her extraordinary gown, had gone the color of paper. Sam dropped to his knees. Not dramatically, not performatively. The way a man drops to his knees when his legs simply stop supporting him slowly, heavily, with the full weight of understanding arriving all at once. He was eye level with his son now, and up close the resemblance was so complete it was almost architectural. The same forehead, the same line of the nose, the same slight asymmetry at the left corner of the mouth that Sam had always assumed was uniquely his. He stopped. His voice had fractured somewhere in the middle of the single syllable. He tried again. "I didn't know." The boy considered this answer seriously, the way children consider things when they've been raised to think before they respond. "Mom knew about us," he said simply. "Why didn't you?" There was no answer to that question that would have helped him. Because the honest answer, because I chose to believe a lie, because I chose my family's money over my wife's word, because when she needed me to be brave I chose to be comfortable, was not the kind of answer a man finds language for while kneeling on a marble floor in front of 400 witnesses and the child he never knew existed. Deborah walked forward then. She moved through the hall the way she had always moved through spaces that were designed to make her feel small, with a steadiness that reframed the room around her rather than allowing the room to define her. She reached her son, placed her hand gently on his shoulder, and looked at Sam with an expression that contained no triumph and no bitterness and no residual hope. Just clarity. "Stand up, Sam," she said quietly. He stood. She reached into the structured bag on her arm and removed a document folder, slim, clean, precisely organized in the way that everything Deborah did was precisely organized. She placed it on the table beside her with a single controlled motion. "Everything in that folder has been verified by 3 independent specialists, 2 forensic accountants, and a private investigator whose credentials are documented on the first page." Her voice was even and clear and reached every corner of the hall without her needing to raise it. "Fertility reports falsified by Dr. Sungmin Park, who received payment from a company registered under Lim Tech Solutions, a subsidiary of Lim Group Holdings." She looked at Soo-yeon. "Your family's company." Soo-yeon's jaw tightened. "Bank transfer records, dated, verified, traced." Deborah continued. "Pharmaceutical receipts for a hormonal compound administered to me without my knowledge or consent over a period of several months. Security footage from this building," she paused briefly, "showing who brought those supplements into my home." She reached into the folder and removed a single photograph. She placed it flat on the table beside the folder and turned it to face the room. It was Soo-yeon, standing in Deborah's kitchen, taken from a security camera angle that left no ambiguity, no room for alternative explanation, no possible claim of coincidence. The hall absorbed this in complete silence. Then the murmuring began, not the cruel, gossiping whisper of earlier, but the low, urgent sound of people processing something that was rearranging their understanding of everything they thought they knew about this wedding, this couple, this family. Sam turned to look at Soo-yeon. She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away. And that small movement, that 2-second look and the turning away, told him everything he needed to know about every reassurance she had ever given him. Every time she had gently agreed that yes, it was very sad about Deborah. Yes, it was the right decision. Yes, he deserved someone who could give him what he needed. And a truth that was beginning to unravel faster than he could comprehend. Behind him, the bride suddenly spoke. Her voice was sharp. "You're just going to stand there and believe her lies." Her words snapped Sam out of his thoughts. But before he could respond, the large screen behind the wedding stage flickered. At first, the guests thought it was just a technical problem. But then an image appeared. A bank transaction. Then another. Then another. Payments. Large payments. All sent to the same private clinic that had declared his ex-wife infertile. The murmurs inside the hall grew louder. Sam slowly turned toward the screen. His heart began pounding, because the name attached to those payments was not unfamiliar. It belonged to the woman standing beside him in a white wedding dress. The bride. Her confident smile began to disappear. "Turn that off," she snapped at the staff. But it was too late. More evidence appeared. Messages. Documents. Medical records. Every piece of it pointing to the same horrifying truth. The infertility diagnosis had never been real. The silence in the room turned into shocked whispers. Guests began standing up from their seats. Some stared at the bride. Others stared at Sam. But the person Sam was staring at was his mother. Because her face had turned pale. And for the first time since he had known her, she looked afraid. His mother, seated in the front row in a silk handbox she had chosen specifically to communicate her authority today, was completely still. The expression on her face was one Sam had never seen there before. Not guilt. He doubted she was capable of that, not really. But something adjacent to it. The expression of a woman who has spent years being absolutely certain she was right and has just, in front of 400 people, encountered the specific cost of that certainty. "I'm not here for your wedding," Deborah said. She looked at Sam directly and her voice dropped slightly, not to exclude the room, but because what she was saying now was, at its core, between them. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because those 3 children," she glanced briefly at her children, who were standing together with their grandmother, her mother, who had flown in from Accra 2 days earlier, and was watching the entire scene with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this moment, deserve to exist in a world where the truth about their beginning is not a secret someone else controls. She looked at the folder on the table. "The legal documentation for paternity and child support is in there as well. My lawyers will be in contact. I don't need anything from you personally, Sam. I built my life without you and I will continue to do so." She paused. "But those children are yours. And what you do with that, who you choose to be for them from this point forward, that is the one thing in this room that is still entirely up to you." She picked up her bag. She turned to her children and said something to them softly in a mix of English and Twi that the room couldn't hear. The oldest boy nodded. The girl took her brother's hand. The youngest looked one more time at Sam with those impossible hand-family eyes and then looked away, back to his mother, back to the person who had always been there. They walked out together. Through the hall, past the silent guests, past the untouched champagne glasses and the frozen string quartet, and the 8 months of custom couture that was now just an expensive dress at a wedding that was never going to happen. The Rolls-Royce was waiting outside, exactly where they had left it. Deborah helped her youngest in first, the way she always did. Then the girl. Then the oldest boy, who paused before getting in and turned back to look at the entrance of the hall one final time, not with longing, not with anger, just with the clear, unhurried gaze of a child filing something away, understanding something, moving forward. He got in. The door closed. Inside the hall, Sam stood alone at the center of everything he had built, the wealth, the connections, the name, the carefully constructed life, and felt, for the first time with complete clarity, the precise dimensions of what his cowardice had cost him. Not the company, not the reputation, not the wedding. The woman who had believed in him, when believing in him, cost her something real. The 5 years of 3 children's lives he would never get back. The ordinary mornings and the bedtime routines and the first words and the first steps and every small, irreplaceable moment that had happened in rooms he was never in a life he had forfeited not because he was forced to, but because when it mattered most, he had looked away. The Rolls-Royce pulled out of the venue's entrance and moved into the Busan afternoon. Inside the car, Deborah's youngest climbed into her lap without asking, the way small children do when they've decided that's where they belong. She wrapped her arms around him and looked out the window at the city passing by. The city she had once arrived in as a stranger, the city that had tried to erase her, the city she had quietly, completely refused to leave in defeat. Her oldest son was watching her from across the seat, with the particular attentiveness of a child, who understands more than adults expect. "Mom," he said, "are you okay?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, not the composed, strategic expression she had worn in that hall, but something smaller and realer and entirely her own. "I've been okay for a long time," she said. "Today I'm just finally done." He nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way that children are satisfied when the truth sounds exactly like the truth. The car moved through the city. Behind them, in a hall full of flowers imported from Amsterdam and guests who would spend the rest of the year talking about what they had witnessed, a wedding dissolved quietly into the specific kind of silence that follows not tragedy but consequence. Inside the wedding hall, Sam stood surrounded by whispers, accusations, and the growing collapse of the life he thought he had built. Because the truth was finally beginning to surface. And once it did, not just his marriage, but his company, his reputation, and the empire he had spent years building, would begin to fall apart. And the cruelest part of all, the one woman who had once stood beside him when he had nothing, was no longer there to save him. What happens next? There is only one way to find out. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on episode 2 of this family feud drama and betrayal, stemming from Sam Hand's lack of spine to put his family where they belong and stand with the lady who was with him when he had nothing. Subscribe and stay tuned.